Hopefully, it's a nice sunny spring day where people are at. It's a little kind of mixed here, but all right. We're just going to get started, I think, right away. And we are recording, so people just, if there's something they missed, we can always go back to that later. So please welcome everybody. This is the GMF webinar for May 8th, Accelerating Climate Action in Communities, a Low Carbon Resilience Approach. My name is Felix Vandergrift. I am the Officer for Events and Outreach with the LLCA team. And I'm going to be sort of introing people and handing it over to the Refocus and Act team here shortly. I just want to start with a land acknowledgement. So I am coming to you today from the I'm situated in Truro, Nova Scotia, and I want to begin by acknowledging that I am joining from the traditional and ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people known as Mi'kma'ki. And I would also additionally like to acknowledge that the folks of African descent have been in Nova Scotia for over 400 years. And I want to offer honor and gratitude to the ancestors of those of African descent who came to this land before we were here. So I would like folks to feel free to add into the chat where they're joining us from today. If you're unsure, we do have a, a a link that I'm going to be putting into the chat that is our native land. And folks, if they aren't sure what territory they're joining from, can check there and put what territory you're joining us from today. A little bit of housekeeping before we get into things. Today's event is taking place in English with French interpretation that's available for folks. You'll see a little interpretation icon at the bottom. If you click that, you can see English and French. If you join the French interpretation, you should be able to see and hear, hear our French interpreter. As well, there's going to be three presentations from Randy, Lauren, and Laura, who are with us today as our panelists. But at any point in time, if you have a question, feel free to put it into the Q&A box. If there is any sort of technical assistance, you can feel free to direct message myself or Jesse Granger, who is also on the call, a colleague of mine. And finally, the chat is available, and I can see some folks putting in some things into the chat, which is great. And yeah, feel free to use that. We're going to do our best to coordinate between that and the Q&A box. Just quickly, too, we're going to just introduce the Green Municipal Fund. I'm sure if anybody's joined us before, they know sort of what this is about. But it's our biggest government of Canada and FCM program that we have. It's 2.4 billion funded by the government of Canada. It is a mix of funding and capacity building delivery, and it's focusing on environmental, economic, and social impact. And I'm joining you from the CRPP, or the Climate Ready Plans and Process team, but we also have our complement, which is the Adaptation and Action team. And you can find all of that on our GMF website, and lots more information about those programs there. So I'm going to hand it over now to Randy and let him take it away. And, or sorry, is it Lauren? Am I handing it over to you first?
It's me.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Perfect. Thanks. All right, Randy. I'm going to hand it over, and yeah, you can take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Felix. And a huge thanks to the whole FCM team for hosting this session and inviting us to join. It's a pleasure to have everyone who's made the time and space to be with us for this call. I think on behalf of the three of us, myself, Lauren, and Laura, we're really excited to have this opportunity to share a little bit of our perspective and experience working to enable municipalities to accelerate climate action. And we're also excited to hear from you as well. So there'll be some opportunity for some dialogue and exchange. I thought I'd mention, in case we're avoiding intros to keep more time for dialogue and presentation. If you're interested in our profiles, the profiles of our organizations, or any of the references that'll come up throughout the presentation, we're going to pop a Google Doc into the chat where you can find reference to all of these full links that you might need during and after the session. So feel free to take advantage of that. Maybe we can remember to put it in a couple times in case people join late and don't see that. In any case, moving right along, I wanted to start just by sharing a little bit of background on why FCM has invited us to be here today, and specifically why ACT and Refocus together. We've both been working collaboratively, sorry, with FCM for a few years now, and I thought I'd share a little bit of that history. So firstly, with ACT in mind, some of you might remember the Municipalities for Climate Innovation program that ran from 2016 to 2021. It was funded by Infrastructure Canada and delivered by FCM. The goal of the program was to help municipalities build capacity to better prepare for and adapt to the new realities of climate change, as well as to reduce greenhouse gases. So ACT was retained by FCM to evaluate the results of the program and draw out key insights. So as part of that process, ACT reviewed the deliverables produced by an amazing 322 municipalities that were funded through the program. The experiences and learnings that they gained uniquely positioned ACT to understand really what's working and what's not working across the Canadian landscape, and ultimately what needs to be innovated in order to accelerate progress. So the LCR, the low carbon resilience approach that will be presented today, was deeply informed by this work with FCM and the results of the study. We'll go on to the next slide. So a little bit about how Refocus fits into the mix here and our relationship with both FCM and ACT. You know, at least from our perspective, there's a growing recognition that the conventional ways that municipalities respond to complex intersecting challenges like climate change, like housing affordability and inequity, rarely yield more than incremental change. It was back in 2019 that Refocus, my organization, partnered with the Viessmann Center for Engagement and Research in Sustainability out of Wilfrid Laurier University, as well as FCM, the City of Kitchener, and a few others. We ended up securing some research funding through the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council to convene a large and diverse multi-sectoral group that focused on exploring the shortcomings of how municipalities are responding to these complex intersecting issues. The result of that convening was the creation of municipalities adapting in response to complexity. So it was ultimately Veris, Refocus, the Flourishing Enterprise Institute, and the ICLE World Secretariat that co-founded MARC. And MARC ultimately brought together more than 200 academics from across disciplines, representatives of municipalities and sector NGOs, systemic innovators, and funders from across Canada and beyond. And our focus was on really testing and mobilizing innovations that were designed to enable deeper change, including transforming governance structures, adapting strategic management practices, and building new capabilities that would enable more progress and accelerated change. And it was through MARC that we originally connected with ACT. So about 18 months ago, we began conversations with ACT about further testing and developing the LCR approach with the support of the MARC network. And eventually, we also engaged with FCM about how they and the LLCA program could play a role in enabling this testing and further development of LCR. So today, we're going to talk more about the results of these conversations and our path forward and how you might be able to play a role. But for now, we'll start just by talking a little bit about our objectives for the session and our agenda. So in terms of our objectives for today, we're hoping to examine with you and deepen awareness of the most significant barriers that are limiting climate action within municipalities. We're hoping to build understanding of the core principles of low carbon resilience and how it can help to streamline climate planning in your municipality. We're hoping you'll discover how the LCR approach can make a difference in practice through some case study presentation. And also, we're going to talk a little bit about the Municipal Climate Action Accelerator and the opportunities for getting involved. Next slide. So in terms of our agenda, next we're going to have Lauren talk a little bit about what's holding back climate action and engage the group. We'll get into the transformative potential of the LCR approach. We'll talk a little bit about accelerating municipal climate action and conclude. So on that note, again, feel free to jump into that Google Doc if you want reference to our profiles or any of the documents to come. And with that, I'll pass things on to Lauren to begin our next section. Thank you.
Thanks, Randy. Yeah, so like Randy mentioned, I'm Lauren Benson. I'm with the ACT or Action on Climate team out of Simon Fraser University. And ACT has been has pioneered and continued to develop the low carbon resilience approach over many years. And we'll get into what exactly that is in a few moments here. But I wanted to start with a bit of a discussion about where we're at when it comes to municipal climate action and some of what's been holding back progress in that area. So I'm sure you've seen many graphs that look like this, if not this one exactly. But really what we're seeing is lots of climate action plans and targets that are increasingly ambitious, but the progress or the implementation of those plans has remained incremental. And we're seeing this is obviously a global graph, but we're seeing this at the Canadian federal level down to provincial and municipal levels as well. Next slide, please. And so just to give an example from the municipal level, so the Net Zero Action Research Partnership, or NZAP, out of the University of Waterloo, published this report last year, and ACT's actually involved in the NZAP project through our executive director, Alison Shaw. But just a little highlight here on progress towards emissions reduction targets. So of the local governments that were surveyed in this study, 63% had developed a climate action plan, and over half had set climate targets for corporate and community greenhouse gas emissions. And you can see the blue and green colors at the top there show where progress has been made on those targets. But you can see that in the lower bars, the red and gray and yellow there is where progress hasn't been made or hasn't been measured. And so that's almost 40% of municipalities haven't reduced their emissions or haven't measured them since they set those targets. So again, this highlights the implementation gap between plans and action at the municipal level. And I just want to highlight, I used a mitigation example here, but while this is traditionally viewed as climate action, as I'll get into with the low carbon resilience approach, we really see that as only part of the puzzle. It's important to complement this with responding to climate impacts and adapting to climate action as well. Next slide, please. So just as a bit more of a backdrop to this conversation and what we're seeing in municipalities, this is just some polling data from our recent federal election. And you can see that there's been a bit of a deprioritization of climate action when it comes to issues that will have the biggest influence on vote. So you'll see climate change number 8 on the list here with only 3% of the vote. And if you compare this to the 2021 federal election, climate change was actually the third most important issue with 22% of the vote just 4 years ago. So this is quite a fall from grace for climate action. And you'll see it's really being outweighed these in our current political scene by the economy, affordability, and the US relationship, which together accounts for about 71% of top issues for voters. So this is sort of to provide the backdrop for this, and we've seen this shift at the municipal level as well in terms of where climate action falls on the priority list. But just wanted to provide a little bit of that backdrop. And what we'll do now is a bit of an exercise. We'll get you folks on the call are really the experts in what the barriers are to municipal climate action. So we want to hear from you. We've put together some ideas. Next slide, please, Felix. Yeah, so if you're able to follow this link, so to menti.com, or use the QR code on your screen. And I believe we can also put that link in the chat for folks who are find that easier. Thank you. So yeah, if you go to this link, you'll be able to see a list of 12 barriers to municipal climate action. And we'd like you to rank your top 3 and submit those, please. So take some time to read through them. And of course, if there's any key barriers that you're facing in your community that aren't on this list, we encourage you to put those into the chat. We want to hear them. We certainly don't promise that this list is comprehensive, but we've done our best to capture what we've been hearing some of those key issues are. So I'll give you all a few moments to fill that out, and maybe I'll just let Felix let me know when we've got enough answers to put some results up here. I'm seeing responses come in a little faster now. I know it's a bunch of reading to get through all those barriers, but appreciate you giving us your rankings. And yeah, once we've got a few more responses here, we can take a look at the results. Nice. Okay, so we've got, if you still have the poll open, we've got live results coming in. And Felix, if you go to the next slide, we might be able to display them as well. Yeah, perfect.
Should be there now.
Yeah, thanks so much. That's awesome. So this is obviously live updating a little, but we can just talk about yeah, some of so the first issue here, oh, if it's still there, is the financial or budgetary constraints and challenges. That's one we've heard echoed many times, and competing municipal priorities. So again, coming back to the possibly that climate change isn't the top issue, limited staff capacity, a lack of council support and will. Yeah, those are coming in as our top 4 issues right now. I'll just, Felix, do we have any more coming in or? Oh yeah, a couple.
Yeah, they're just
Looks
sort of
like,
trickling in a little bit.
yeah, it looks like those are some pretty strong, at least the first and second are pretty strong favorites for barriers. And then, yeah, we've got also lack of data and understanding is in there at fifth, competing. So yeah, I'll let people continue to fill that out through the call if they wish, but for now, maybe let's move to the next slide.
I was going to say it's going to
Um,
stay open so people can feel free.
Perfect, thanks. Yeah, so something you may have noticed in looking at these barriers is that they're not necessarily related to climate action planning itself. They're broader issues or broader concerns within the municipal organization. So one thing we like to think about when we're talking about the low carbon resilience approach and systems change more broadly is this iceberg model for moving beyond incrementalism. So like an iceberg, there's just a small portion of it visible above the surface. And so that in the context of municipal climate action would be the observable behaviors or actions, so the events that are actually happening. And then beneath the surface, you've got the patterns and trends that are made up of a series of events. And then you've got the system structures, and in this case, strategic management practices that are reinforcing those patterns. And then beneath that, you've got the mental models, so mindsets of leaders in the organization, or the underlying culture or beliefs that really fuel that structure. And so getting at some of these barriers to competing priorities, the financial or budgetary constraints and challenges, some of those top issues really requires looking beneath the surface and leveraging change through the lower layers of that iceberg, if you will. So if you go to the next slide, please, Felix. Now we'll actually talk about the low carbon resilience approach itself. So for those of you who are familiar with the Action on Climate team and have spent some time on our website, this may be old hat to you, but for those who are new to it, I'll just give a little overview. So next slide, please. Yeah, so the low carbon resilience approach, like I said, is developed by ACT and is really meant to be a step change in climate action. And the key piece of the approach is that it brings together both climate mitigation, so the reduction in emissions, and climate adaptation, so reducing risks associated with climate change. And simultaneously, it centers equity and co-benefits in those decision processes. So we like to use this graph to describe low carbon resilience and really to highlight the sort of contradictory approaches that can happen when low carbon resilience isn't being used. So we've got on the y-axis risk from I guess high to low, and then emissions from high to low on the x-axis there. And so I'll just start in the bottom left corner there. And so really, if we're looking at a high emissions, high risk scenario, we'd be seeing suburban sprawl. So expanding roads and highways, obviously reduced modes of transportation and high emissions for construction. I think, Felix, if you hit next, we might have an image to go over top of that. Perfect, thanks. And then in the bottom right corner, if we were to do mitigation focused planning, for example, we might have EV chargers, so a great emissions reduction strategy. But if we were to build them in an area that's susceptible to flooding under climate change, then we might lose that asset, or we might not see the benefit of it. If you hit next, I think there's another photo there. And then under adaptation focused planning, so that would be, again, looking specifically at reducing risk. So it would be a low risk but high emissions scenario. And that would be things like concrete seawalls. So, emissions intensive to build, but great at reducing climate risks for example, flooding or sea level rise. Next slide there. And then really where we're trying to get to is this top right corner. So we're looking for solutions that offer low risk and low emissions. And we refer to this as a sustainable development pathway. And there's a number of solutions that fall in this bucket: green, blue infrastructure, zero emission and risk resilient buildings. But really where we're headed with this is basically a resilient state for our communities. And if you hit next there, I think we've got a nice green urban image there. Yeah, great. And then next slide again, please, Felix. So yeah, this resilient state and community resilience more broadly, I think this kind of calls back to the shifting political sands I referenced earlier, with climate change being lower on the priority list. I think regardless of politics, we can all agree that we want to live in communities that are socially, economically, and environmentally resilient. And this is a working definition from ACT here, but a keynote is that we use the word thriving. So we want to be moving towards a state that not only assesses and minimizes vulnerabilities, but is also able to bounce back and recover and even improve following extreme events or other disruptions. Next slide, please. So this brings us to what the low carbon resilience approach actually is in practice. And we want to be clear off the bat that it's not an additional process. It's not meant to create a low carbon resilient plan and be its own sort of stream of work that then sits on the shelf. Really, it's meant to take the existing priorities and plans within a municipality and synergize them, streamline them, and action them. And so we like to talk about it as a lens through which to look at existing work in a municipality. And so we've got this three-pronged microscope here, which looks at, so reducing risk and vulnerabilities would be the adaptation piece, reducing emissions, mitigation, and then, like I mentioned, advancing equity and other co-benefits. So looking at all three of these priorities simultaneously. And like I mentioned in that quadrant diagram earlier, this really helps reduce contradictory outcomes and allows us to multi-solve and identify new opportunities, both for projects and for areas of funding. And we're not saying that every project or investment by a municipality needs to hit all of these notes. But we want projects to be identified with these priorities in mind. So we know there's trade-offs and synergies with any kind of climate action work, and we want to incorporate this into decision making. Next slide, please. Thanks. So I'll just give a little bit of background on the previous work that ACT has done on the low carbon resilience approach. So this is the Integrated Climate Action for BC Communities initiative. It was active between 2018 and 2021, and ACT worked with 10 partner communities throughout the province, including one First Nation. And as you can see from this image here, there's some larger urban communities as well as smaller rural ones as well. And really, this was a ground truthing of LCR. So it involved co-creating and embedding the approach into community planning, asset management, and corporate strategy. And as part of this work, there were some practical resources developed for local governments. You can see more about this project, which we call the Ikabiki project, on our website. Next slide, please. So one of the learnings from this project was really looking at the level of integration and implementation of climate action within municipalities. And this is a phase or path diagram that we developed to show that low carbon resilience can really be can be actioned at any stage of planning for a municipality, with always the goal of moving plans towards implementation. So if you're a small municipality with little capacity and no dedicated climate staff members, LCR can still help you to streamline your climate action planning by coordinating and cross-referencing it across plans and priorities. And Laura Sampliner will speak a little bit to Path 2 in her presentation on Port Moody, but that's really streamlining and co-evaluating. And then Path 3, for a lot of municipalities on the call, you will have done a lot of this work already, these initial sort of streamlining steps. So really the Path 3 approach is just mainstream, so embedding climate action into decision-making processes, including budgeting, and really bringing that to the fore in all of the decisions that are made at the corporate level. Next slide, please. So the low carbon resilience approach follows a typical planning to implementation process, and this is just a graphic from our low carbon resilience handbook, which is linked in the Google Doc and also on our website. But it differs in a few key ways. So one of the learnings from that ICRVICI project was that developing right at the start, developing a cross-departmental, cross-sectoral climate action team was really key to the success of this approach. And it really allowed climate action to be embedded into decision making and procurement and financing decisions. And this not only helped to kind of embed that work, but it also built awareness with staff, built their literacy and their capacity about climate change and how to action it in their scope of work. And ultimately, we saw in some of the most successful case communities that it really catalyzed changes to corporate structure and governance. Next slide, please. So just as an example of this, this is sort of indicative of that Path 3 in the diagram a couple of slides back. So this is the District of Summerland had a approach that was brought forward by staff where consultants would integrate low carbon resilience into the district's business prioritization criteria and reporting frameworks. So it allowed them to effectively communicate systemic benefits such as avoided damage cost and alignment with triple bottom line decisions, and help to reorient consultants and their approaches to mainstream climate action. So the district now requires that all decisions and projects over $10,000 be screened with low carbon resilience criteria. And you can see there's a little flow process here with the prioritization process being where that LCR comes in, and projects are signed off on by managers, directors, finance, the CAO, and council. So then that simultaneously enhances organizational climate literacy through those steps. So really, Summerland recognized the value of building climate into current priorities to reduce future impacts. Next slide, please. So I'm sure you're all aware of the many co-benefits that come with climate action, but just wanted to highlight a few here. If you hit next, Felix, I think there's some images that should appear on the slide. Thanks, that's great. So really what low carbon resilience allows us to do is to promote actions that multitask. And you'll see on the top image that came up there, there's a number of economic co-benefits that come along with climate action. And in the current political climate where economy and affordability are top of mind, those co-benefits can really be the vehicle for bringing climate action to the fore. And they're really a great way of communicating that value to a wide range of audiences and showing the potential to multitask and multi-solve across economic, environmental, and social priorities, amongst others. So this really allows us to support community resilience and sustainability goals, and also save communities and taxpayers money. And it really opens up opportunities for funding climate action projects. So by piggybacking climate solutions with other areas of funding, we can really open the door in that arena as well. Next slide, please. So just to bring home that co-benefits piece, highlighting some work done by the Pacific Institute for Climate Solutions. They authored a report earlier this year on framing climate action. It's called Promoting Climate Engagement in BC, Reactive and Proactive Strategies. And although this is a BC report, I think it really does resonate throughout Canada. And so one of their findings was that they found 5 key framing approaches for discussing climate action based on co-benefits. So economic framing, especially important right now, but equally we have public health, environment and biodiversity, social norms, and responding to the impacts of extreme weather. We're obviously all feeling the impacts of climate change already, so that last framing can be very compelling depending on the community. And so, yeah, all this to say, I don't want folks to be disheartened by climate action slipping down on the list of priorities. I think there's a lot of ways that we can bring it to the attention of our elected officials and staff members, coworkers, and really that there's lots of ways we can use co-benefits to bring the LCR approach forward. And with that, I'll hand it over to Laura. She'll talk a bit about Port Moody's experience in that Ikaviki project I mentioned, and her work to implement LCR within the municipality.
Great, thanks, Lauren. Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Sampliner. I'm the manager of climate action at the City of New West. I'm very honored to be speaking to you all from the unceded and unsurrendered land of the Halkomelin speaking peoples. And I just want to also acknowledge that colonialism has made invisible their histories and connections to the land. As a city and as an individual, we're learning and building relationships with the people whose lands that we're on. I just also wanted to thank the organizers for inviting me to share today, and I hope hearing about some of my previous experiences with Port Moody and using the LCR pathway and lens will be valuable to you. And I just wanted to also note that I will be sharing on behalf of the City of Port Moody, but as I mentioned, I'm no longer working there. I'm at the City of New Westminster now. So what I have to say is based on the past and may not necessarily reflect the current situation. But the staff at the City of Port Moody are incredible and continue to be leaders in implementing low carbon resilience. And they're always open to conversations if you'd like to reach out and learn more about where things are at today. Next slide. So if you've never heard of Port Moody, it's a relatively small community spanning about 26 square kilometers and a population of about 35,000. For context, Port Moody is about 30 minutes east of the city of Vancouver, but it is located on our transit SkyTrain system, so it makes it quite easy to get in and out of the city, which also led to some rapid community growth over the last decade. So within the city as an organization, it's a relatively small pool of staff who often are responsible for multiple roles. And this means that the staff are incredibly busy. There are many competing priorities due to the pressures of growth faced by the city. And at the same time, there was also a high interest in tackling climate change. And that came from a lot of our elected official leadership and community interest. However, with being a relatively small municipality, there were some limited resources that became a challenge. So that's just a bit of background on Port Moody, and I'll go into a few examples of how we use low carbon resilience and the challenges and benefits and some further opportunities to integrate LCR in a municipal setting. So next slide, please. So Port Moody created one of the first climate action plans that combines mitigation and adaptation into one strategic document. And this was back in 2019, we started that process. Originally, we had the intention to create a separate community mitigation plan and a separate community adaptation plan. But through participating in the Ikibiki initiative that Lauren mentioned and using that LCR lens, we decided to combine it into one plan, which was a huge benefit in terms of cost and time saving, because instead of doing 2 planning processes for each plan and identifying 2 separate budgets, we combined it into one plan and developed a streamlined strategic plan through one planning process. So the 2020 Climate Action Plan was the result, which used mitigation and adaptation criteria to ensure that low carbon resilience focused actions were prioritized in the final plan. but it also used a co-benefits legend similar to the one that Lauren shared, and we kind of cherry picked a few that really resonated with our community from that bigger list to highlight where focus areas of the plan provided synergies with other strategic priorities like job creation, reducing traffic congestion, and cost savings, and those were priorities for the community at the time. So Port Moody also developed and heavily utilized an interdepartmental staff team that really enabled climate considerations to be advanced in projects throughout the organization. And the combined planning process was really an easy sell, as I mentioned earlier. But one of the challenges through that process and in working with the community was that we really didn't effectively communicate low carbon resilience to the community. We used the term LCR, or low carbon resilience, and it really just didn't resonate with anyone outside of the climate practitioner space. So it became obvious that we needed to do more work with the community to help them understand LCR and redefine it through common terms that actually resonated with them. So this is still ongoing work. And if you click ahead, the first animation, yeah, this one. This is an example of the criteria that we use to evaluate actions in the plan. So each action was given a score between 1 to 3 for potential to reduce emissions, build resilience, and provide co-benefits. And actions that did not meet a minimum passing score were not considered for inclusion in the plan. And this was just one step of our action evaluation process, but really highlights how we tried to integrate low carbon resilience. And if you advance just one more, there should be, yes, this is our, sorry, it's a bit busy on the slide, but this is a list of our co-benefits that were specifically called out in the Climate Action Plan to highlight synergies. And this was a really effective communication tool with the public and with our community leaders because it demonstrated that we were making progress on multiple community priorities through different actions. And next slide. So creating internal capacity, in my opinion, is really necessary to achieving low carbon resilient success. And in my experience, is really valuable to build within all city departments. So in Port Moody, general managers identified one person from each relevant city department to sit on the staff climate action working group, and we met regularly every month. And this group was really instrumental in developing and implementing strategic climate plans and actions, allowing staff to take accountability and leading many of the actions that they developed through those plans. But one of the challenges we had was gaining momentum with staff who were really busy and, as I mentioned, wearing multiple hats. And there was a bit of lead up time to understanding the value of low carbon resilience and the value of climate work in general. So to get around this, we had many one-on-one meetings where I spent time building relationships and connecting this work directly to their team work plans and really trying to highlight the synergies of climate action work with their specific departmental mandates. And a lot of that was through the co-benefits as well. And reinforcements of the importance of climate work and low carbon resilience from our council was also very helpful in ensuring staff buy-in. And eventually, using both the bottom-up and top-down approaches, we did have quite a significant buy-in from our staff departmental group, and they actually still meet today, as far as I'm aware. And an additional tactic that helped maintain the staff buy-in through implementation is that every year we would host a implementation planning workshop where we asked staff to forecast what actions each year that they would be initiated, and they actually self-selected those actions. We supported them with criteria and actually evaluating which ones needed to be advanced. But through that LCR lens and their self-selection, we were able to select actions that hit multiple community priorities that led to higher buy-in because they were selecting the actions they wanted to work on and felt were important. And that really drove the phased implementation process instead of us as a climate team just telling them which actions need to be initiated. And next slide. So budgeting, as we all are aware, is a challenge. There's a lack of funding, especially in smaller communities. Municipal budgets aren't innately broken down by mitigation and adaptation projects. And as we embed low carbon resilience deeper, many projects are actually labeled as both. So it's sometimes difficult to understand where to pull money from to support those low carbon resilient projects. One strategy that worked for Port Moody was to create flags for climate action in our budgeting system. So Port Moody asks staff each budget cycle to check off if a budget line item, existing or new, is supporting a focus area of the climate action plan. And so not all projects overlap with climate action, and that's okay, but it allows us to understand and track the projects that do represent climate work that's happening across the organization, either through the climate action plan or not, and be able to tally that and track it over time. And we chose to flag by focus area of the plan because that was broad enough to allow us to categorize, but not silo projects exclusively. But also because council and the community were used to seeing actions categorized by focus area. So it's just a consistent way of communicating as well. We also used that same budget software to flag projects that were tied to either mitigation or adaptation or both. And then we could pull a summary of spending reports for different climate flag categories, which was very valuable in our reporting and accountability. And tracking and summarizing climate spending really helps council to prioritize where resources were needed and us as staff to communicate that to decision makers, to monitor and track spending on climate action priorities. And then that allows us to link this spending directly to positive and tangible outcomes. And next slide. So just to summarize some of the key LCR outcomes that are well established in Port Moody is really that interdepartmental collaboration. It's still going strong. That shared accountability through annual public reporting on progress, including providing specific updates on action status, key performance indicators, and overall trajectory towards our goals and targets. These are all available on Port Moody's Climate Action webpage if anyone wants to take a look. There's also that annual work planning session that I mentioned with staff, which translated into those public phased implementation strategies that were owned by staff in all departments and resulted in a lot of streamlined projects that hit both mitigation and adaptation goals. And one example of this is actually our finance team advocated to take on development of a natural asset strategy and inventory because they saw the value that natural assets could provide in terms of municipal services and cost savings compared to some of the traditional infrastructure routes. And they also saw access to increased funding, and that really became evident by using that low carbon resilience lens. So before I left Port Moody as well, we were getting deeper into implementation on a few things, such as embedding low carbon resilience in staff recruitment for many positions. For example, specific interview questions about climate action and linking key position work plans to the climate action plan. And I was really struggling with trying to find ways of better tracking progress through key performance indicators, how to get better, more consistent data, align with other jurisdictions, and align mitigation and adaptation priorities to communicate and track progress effectively across both of those climate planning streams. How to enhance climate action budgeting through thinking about creative streams of accounting and revenue generation was top of mind. And then lastly, data visualization was really something I was interested in. We were working on a mapping project of mapping high emission assets across the community overlaid with high vulnerability areas to assess opportunities for streamlined action and targeting areas that are both high risk to climate impacts, but also have high emissions, coming from some of the assets in that area. And next slide. So I just wanted to share some of the tactics that we use that were helpful in our LCR journey. And sorry, Felix, there's a bunch of animations here. Thank you. The first is around messaging of the planning process. When we plan for mitigation and adaptation in tandem, you will find that there is a significant cost saving in most or some cases because you are only taking part in one planning process instead of two, similar to what we did with the climate action plan. This was a big value proposition for Port Moody to save half of the planning process costs. The second one, we found it extremely valuable because, especially in the early days of building staff capacity, and the momentum in bringing external experts to communicate low carbon resilience. We had our consultants who were helping us develop the plan, and we also had the SFU ACT team come in and speak with our staff on several occasions in person to communicate low carbon resilience in different ways, which brought a lot of weight to this work. And as alluded to earlier, one of our challenges was on language and communication. And I would recommend to define low carbon resilience and what the important intersections, or co-benefits are to your local context early on, and be consistent with that language and messaging, because that will really drive home the messaging. And similar to cost, there was also valuable time savings by using the low carbon resilience lens in the planning process. And just by doing one planning process instead of two, it saved about half of the time. It would have taken us, probably 2+ years to prepare two different community plans versus the 1 year that it took us to create the streamlined plan. Using local examples really resonated with staff, elected officials in the community. We would talk about LCR opportunities in specific development applications and in city infrastructure projects like stormwater, and that brought the messaging home to those staff as well. And then lastly, building relationships with individuals to bring them along the low carbon resilience journey is really important. I found that spending one-on-one time with staff or elected officials, if that's appropriate in your community, and decision makers and community members, not only just talking about climate goes a long way and building the trust, but it's also important to reinforce the connection to climate with their specific work plans and their department mandates. And not everyone is able to see the connections. They're not as deep into the climate world as we are. So it's really important to make it obvious and point those connections out in a really gentle and encouraging way to them. And then next slide. And I'll just end here. This is a busy chart. So if anyone wants a screenshot, feel free to do that. But it just demonstrates some of the opportunities to center low carbon resilience that I've come across. But this is by no means exhaustive. There are plenty more opportunities out there. And I won't go through this list, but it's here if you want to screenshot it, think about it at a later point in time. And if you use some of the tactics that I mentioned on the previous slide, it actually becomes easier and easier to identify these opportunities. And sometimes others start even identifying them for you and implementing them. And that's really where we get into that, streamlined, really embedded low carbon resilience in the work that we do as a municipality. And I think that's it. I think my last slide, the advanced one, is just my contact information. The last thing I'll just say is related to today. Language, as I mentioned a couple of times, is becoming really important. In 2020, when we were starting out and it was the climate emergency era, we used the terms like climate and mitigation and adaptation because those were front and center. And now the landscape has shifted, and terms like affordability, economic stimulus, jobs are resonating more with people, and that's where we're at. And I did find that low carbon resilience allows you to identify those co-benefits and achievement of multiple priorities. And that really brings to light some of those other pieces of work that are more important or resonating more with folks at this moment in time. So this process is a great way or a great tool or framework to really shift your framing to suit the local needs and interest and priority. And I think that that's a really big value to this process as well. So thanks very much for your time. I think we have time for a couple of questions before I hand it over to Randy if anyone's got anything burning.
Yeah, at this point, anyone who has questions about the LCR approach for Lauren and the original study, or for Laura specific to Port Moody, we have a good 10 or 15 minutes for questions. So you can pop questions into the chat and we can expose them that way and speak to them. Or if you want to take yourself off mute and ask a question directly, I think you're able to do that. But Felix, correct me if I'm wrong.
No, people have to request to have themselves unmuted. But yeah, we usually guide people towards they're at the bottom of your screen. There is a Q&A box, or you can feel free to put it in the chat. But yeah, if someone needs further clarifying, they can, I think, request to be unmuted.
Perfect. Okay, we have a first question in the chat from Peter Robinson. He asks, what best practices do you have on integrating climate action into municipal budgeting process? Communities have a wide variety of approaches. Lauren or Laura, do either of you want to take the question?
Yeah, Laura, if you want to speak to Port Moody, go for it, and then I could provide a broader answer.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. I think it really depends, as you mentioned, on how your budgeting process is set up. I mean, typically there's, the call once a year for for new budget items that come in, and you work with your budgeting folks to think about new projects and appropriately account for those in the budgeting process. So I think that's really, from my experience, the best opportunity is that annual budgeting cycle to integrate this, and working with budgeting folks or finance folks early on in the process is really critical, because you're always setting up for the year ahead. So the earlier you can do that, the better it will be integrated for the upcoming budget cycle. We used a software called that was very helpful. It allowed you to do some of those budgeting flag pieces and tally summations of the flags, like I mentioned. But I know not every community has a budgeting software or uses that specific one. So, exploring some of those tools, looking at your whatever budgeting software that you do use or tools, and trying to find ways to flag different projects, to really have ways of tallying different spending across the community is really helpful that we found for just reporting and accountability and tracking of our work. And I think I mentioned this in the presentation, but it was really valuable to actually see those line items, be able to reflect back on them and know that, this was a specific action that was working on mitigation or adaptation or both, and tie it back to a tangible community outcome. So it becomes really critical for that. And your budgeting folks as well might have some suggestions to tie it into annual reports if it's really linked in with that annual cycle. But really working with them early on and figuring out what those opportunities are is key, because it's kind of customized. We're all little snowflakes and it's all different.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. That's a great answer. Yeah, I'll just add that, like I said, in the Ikabiki project, we worked with municipalities who had a range of levels of sophistication and detail in their budgeting systems. And so, like I mentioned before, we don't want this LCR approach to be a whole separate stream of work. I really want to layer it in as a lens through which to look at that budgeting process. And like Laura said, depending on the system you have in place, whether that's something you can integrate into your software or just have as a sort of standard form or check that can be done at a specific point in the process, then whatever works best. But really want to echo also that it's engaging folks and having those conversations about the framework under which you're going to be integrating climate action into municipal budgeting. It's important to do it early and to keep doing it just so that it remains a priority and gets really embedded in a way that's just consistent and carries forward. Hopefully that answers your question.
That's great. Thanks so much, Lauren and Laura. We have another question from Anna Murphy asking about entry points for LCR. So she's thinking about possible different users and what opportunities there may be for retrofitting infrastructure, or maybe even LCR methods that aren't related to infrastructure design. Any thoughts on that front, Lauren?
Yeah, for sure. And just to be clear, the low carbon resilience approach is really not related to infrastructure design, although I will admit that the examples I gave in that quadrant diagram were quite infrastructure heavy. But really, it's meant to encompass all forms of climate action, and retrofitting infrastructure certainly falls into that sphere. Yeah, there's lots of great opportunities to integrate low carbon resilience with retrofits. We are currently doing a lot of work under our Natural Solutions Initiative at ACT to integrate green infrastructure into the retrofit process wherever possible, and really have nature-based solutions as a key way to reduce emissions and adapt to climate change. But yeah, it can certainly extend beyond infrastructure, and the retrofit process is certainly an area that LCR can be applied. If you have specific questions about a project, it sounds like you might, feel free to reach out.
Perfect, Lauren. There's a question directly for Laura in the chat asking how you guided your staff towards determining whether their projects were climate related or supporting climate actions or not. So you mentioned the flags in budgeting and for selection. So she's curious if they already had enough background and knowledge to assess this on their own, or if you were involved.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, because we were a small municipality, the folks who were on our climate action working group were also the same folks who were managing budgets. So we were lucky in that sense that they were already brought along the journey with us through the climate action plan development. We didn't have a lot of turnover during that period as well. So they were already familiar with the focus areas of the plan, with what we were looking for. They'd done the evaluation on the original actions in the climate action plan. So they were well versed on it. I would say if you do have different staff doing the budgeting piece versus involved in your sort of day-to-day operations and climate action work, that you have to do a little bit of that that hard work to get them up to speed and familiar with what you're looking for. What we did do as well on the budgeting side was after everything had been submitted for the budget call, I would actually sit down with the finance team and review every single flag and verify if we did, agree with how it was categorized or not. And that was sort of just a second check. So if you do feel like you need some additional oversight, then that is an option as well to work with your finance team on. Not sure if that helps at all, but I know we had kind of a perfect situation there where the staff who were budgeting were also doing the climate action work with us. So if you can get some of those decision makers in the room with you in your working groups, that is really valuable. We found that in implementation, that was really where we moved towards. We sort of shifted the who was at the table with us in the implementation group versus who was at the we had a bigger group that was more operationally focused and helping us develop the plan, and then we sort of trimmed that back to be more of the decision makers towards implementation. So if you can have more decision makers in the room with you, that does help a lot.
That's perfect. Thanks so much, Laura. There's another question in the Q&A from Freya asking what best practice framework processes and tools are there for practically integrating LCR into decision making across the organization beyond capital projects. I thought I'd kick to you, Lauren, but just before I do so, I thought I'd offer just a little bit of insight. We're going to get into sort of the programmatic opportunities available after the Q&A. But just to preface that, if we link this back to the iceberg model, what we're talking about in integrating an LCR approach into how things are done municipally is really founded on establishing a mindset shift and beginning to engage with the governance structures and strategic management practices that limit how climate action is taken. And so the idea of this facilitative process is very much that there is a complexity to engaging with the people, the leaders, the organizational staff who are involved in doing what they do and helping to create a new understanding of what it is to execute work in a manner that is considerate of these interconnections, that allows us to understand the unintended consequences we make by doing things in ways that are conventionally oriented and maybe not where the impacts of not addressing climate change are less visible, and also the missed opportunities that also don't really show up in the way that things are done. So I don't know that there is necessarily a very prescriptive approach, I should say a tool or framework beyond LCR that would be practically applicable in all situations. It's really about designing for the organization, their constraints, their ambitions, the people around the table, et cetera, and building conversations and actions that make sense contextually. But Lauren, perhaps you could share a little bit more from a specific LCR approach perspective.
Yeah, no, that's great, Randy, and a good teaser for what's to come. But I will say, I'll echo the sentiment that we don't want to be prescriptive. Like obviously, it depends on the context within your municipality and who those people are who are in the room, the decision makers who need to be brought along. But just to kind of whet your appetite on the work that's been done with low carbon resilience in the past, there's a couple of resources that I'll point you to that are linked in that Google Doc that's been shared. So the low carbon resilience decision tool, and then also the low carbon resilience handbook. And they lots of case studies and examples throughout that highlight some of the other ways that LCR can be integrated within municipalities. So yeah, hopefully that helps to begin to answer the question.
That's great, Lauren. Thank you. There's a similar, at least related question that comes up in the Q&A from Ruth, just about strategies to avoid climate washing that can happen when we apply a climate lens. And I mean, I appreciate the sentiment because certainly there's the possibility of a tokenistic approach to checking the box that climate was considered, or that, there's a budgetary mechanism that ensures climate is a focus whenever decisions are made, that doesn't fundamentally address what is missing about understanding the complexity of climate change and being able to make sense of that as part of understanding how a municipality fulfills on its purpose of enabling the well-being of the community that it serves. And I think this is where going all the way down the iceberg and beginning to address mental models as in the mindsets of leaders, and specifically something we can't really get into much detail about today in the limited time that we have, but beginning to embrace a systems lens as part of how we make sense of the management of a municipality, understanding things in full living color and seeing interdependency relationships beyond what shows up in the financial performance and relatively simple indicators that are used to understand how things are going and what needs attention. There is a very significant sort of transformation or transition from a conventional way of doing things towards a newer paradigm that LCR can bridge. But I think to your point about avoiding the climate washing, it's that deeply rooted work that is missing and that needs to be facilitated. And there's no guarantee that a municipality is open to it or has the capacity to engage in it. But our interest is to create the dialogue and conversation that leads people within municipalities to be motivated to explore that territory and begin that sort of journey or transition. Would you add anything, Lauren?
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. And I think, like you say, it really comes back to the capacity building piece of the LCR approach and bringing folks along to make those decisions and use the lens authentically wherever possible. And hopefully, when it's applied broadly within a municipality, those projects that are climate washing will pale in comparison to the ones that are truly considering climate action, both adaptation, mitigation, and co-benefits.
Perfect. There's a question in the chat from Raquel. I hope I pronounced that correctly. It's to Laura, and the question's about how municipal staff, no matter where they are in the organization or how small the impact may be, how can they contribute to supporting climate action? I guess it's a broad question, but hopefully you can offer just a little bit of insight, having done a lot of work yourself.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, I think even just your willingness to want to support is goes a long way. Um, if your role isn't necessarily tied to climate action, or hasn't traditionally been tied to climate action, I think that's a good first step is looking at, what is the scope of your role and where might those intersections be? And if you have folks who are working on climate action in your municipality, you can always reach out to them, and they would be happy to work with you to kind of identify some of those opportunities if you're interested. I've also seen in other communities where this is appropriate and depending on your size and capacity, staff-led climate teams that are sort of just working on as a corporation, what can they do? What can other staff in different departments who are just generally interested in making an impact or doing things off the side of their desk that relate to climate action? How can they get together and support the organization in a different way that's a less formalized way? And that has really gone a long way in some communities. So if you're interested in participating in a group like that, you could explore that as well. Even just learning and thinking about as you're going about your daily work, what are the impacts of the work that you're doing on climate action? Is there, an increase in emissions that's as a result of some of the work, and is there a way to reduce that or mitigate it somehow? Or is the work that you're doing impacted by climate change in some way, like extreme heat or rainfall patterns, or are you seeing that on a daily basis that you can even just start to track and be aware of and then communicate that out? I think there's so many little things that if you have the time and capacity and space to do that, there's a lot of intersections between all the work in different departments, and it's just a matter of figuring out what you have the time and space for and what you can support.
Beautiful, Laura. Thanks so much for that response. We're going to take one final question, and I'm going to look to you, Lauren, for an answer. It comes from one of our longtime municipal partners from the region of Peel, Mark Pajot, and the question is perfectly placed. It's a question that often comes up around where LCR is really most appropriate or applicable. There's this perception often because LCR is a more systemic or sophisticated approach to dealing with climate change that it really applies best in a larger municipality that has capacity and multiple levels of management, et cetera. It's not exactly the case, and I'll look to Lauren to maybe elaborate on my response and answering Mark's question.
Sure, yeah. And so the diagram that I shared with the different paths to implementing LCR is maybe a good starting point for this discussion. So really trying to show that no matter the size or capacity in your municipality or the sophistication of your climate action planning to date, there is sort of a path for you to take to implement LCR. But there's certainly not a target audience for the approach. It's meant to layer seamlessly onto the work that's being done within the municipality. And also maybe worth mentioning that that path diagram was developed as part of the Ikabiki project, which, like I mentioned, was between 2018 and 2021. And if you'll remember from my slides on climate action and its importance in our political spheres, it was a bit of a different time. And so some of those paths are really aligned for the time, like Laura mentioned, at Port Moody too, is a bit of a different approach, whereas now using that sort of co-benefits piece is really crucial. And I think that mature municipalities, as you refer to them, Mark, can certainly benefit from that sort of co-benefits and linking together the existing great climate work that's been done, and finding ways to move that forward towards implementation, even with climate action not being top of mind.
Yeah, that's so helpful, Lauren. I mean, it's come up a bunch of times, especially with smaller municipalities, where there's a lack of perceived applicability. And I think the advantage or the opportunity in municipalities that don't have significant budget and aren't able to build an entire climate office or small team, et cetera, is that there's efficiency as we go straight from recognizing climate change as a complex issue that requires attention into thinking about how that interfaces with everything the organization is doing, making sense of it at a system level instead of starting on the side of the organization and beginning with an incremental approach, just because there isn't the resources to enable that. So there's the potential for smaller municipalities, not unlike Port Moody, to sort of leapfrog over some of what would be conventional climate action best practice into more systemic and transformative models of climate action. On that note, thank you all so much for the questions you've asked. There'll be one more opportunity for Q&A following this section, but we'll move on and we'll talk a little bit about accelerating municipal climate action. Next slide, please. Yes, so I wanted to quickly highlight the results of this report that was released through the Innovate for Cities Forum back in 2021. So the findings were based on almost 7,000 people from 160 countries globally, and it was a process of convening, sort of a virtual conference that happened through the pandemic that included almost 900 speakers across nearly 200 sessions. And essentially, the conference really took stock of what's commonly referred to as the implementation gap in climate action, which Lauren alluded to, this idea that there's more ambitious planning and target setting happening, but nothing near proportionate in terms of progress being made. We're essentially failing miserably in adhering to the targets that we know we need to achieve globally to avoid climate catastrophe. If we can click the next button, what you see here is a summary of what the report provided, which was insight into what we actually need to innovate. So essentially what you see is this triple helix model, where on the left-hand side, we have changes in mindset, and on the right-hand side, we have tools and processes. So to quickly run down this, I mean, there is a 100 and whatever page report that's referenced in the materials we provide in our Google Doc that you're welcome to take a look at. But in brief, in terms of changes of mindset, we're thinking about municipalities developing new ways and pathways for creating visions of the future, implementing more integrated and systemic approaches to practicing, and building people-centered solutions. And then in terms of practice, we essentially need new tools and processes for doing the work that municipalities do. And that means those that are more participatory in nature and involve and include other stakeholders, not limited to the public. It means working in partnership and understanding we need collective action in order to achieve goals that span beyond the power or control of an individual municipality. It means new ways of thinking about and financing the future and what's needed in order to transition, as well as building new capabilities and capacities within municipal organizations to function in these new ways. And finally, there's a critical role for research, and that's very much embedded in what you'll see next, which is this idea that the stuff that we're doing or that we need to do is quite complex, and there's lots of learning to be done. So having research accompany the innovation and testing that we do in the field is very necessary as part of refining and building a new and future ready set of best practices. Next slide, please. And so we get to the project that we've been excited to share with you, which is the product of our collaboration, that being between ACT and Refocus, which is the Municipal Climate Action Accelerator. So the purpose of this project is to enable municipalities to transform their response to climate change and build new capabilities to help navigate complex corporate and community challenges. And there's a number of objectives associated with the accelerator. So firstly, we want to create new opportunities to pilot and test the LCR approach with a diversity of municipalities across Canada and to facilitate peer exchange amongst the municipalities that are involved. We also, as I mentioned from this learning and research perspective, that we want to closely study these engagements with multiple municipalities to draw learnings and build a body of evidence that will allow us to create new knowledge, and as part of that, to mobilize that knowledge widely. Our aim is to train municipal sector NGOs, which I know many of you participate, that may be specific to your province. They may be more broadly scoped across the country or even locally based. But essentially, the goal is to train sector NGOs and other experts and consultants on how LCR can be facilitated by involving them directly in the process of learning through this sort of collective experiential learning process that we're describing. And ultimately, the goal is to leverage the collective intelligence of everyone involved to learn and improve and refine the LCR approach over time so that it's useful in any context. And finally, the last objective is to scale facilitation of the LCR approach across Canada and beyond. So really to build the capacity for LCR programs to be designed and implemented or executed in as many places as there's interest and appetite to do that. Next slide, please. Just to link things back or come a little bit full circle, we're very much talking about addressing these underlying barriers. So whether we're looking at the results of the report that came through the Innovate for Cities conference, the sharing that Laura did around Port Moody, and some of the case studies that Lauren spoke to, the goal of the work that we're doing is really to get down to the underlying barriers, coming back to our first conversation, that limit the progress we're making through conventional approaches to climate action. And so the design of the LCR program that we will be piloting involves, generally speaking, a two-phase approach. The first page is really about engaging with leaders and shifting mindsets through experiential workshops and conversations, really facilitating dialogue. And the second phase, based on building a foundation of trust, relationship, motivation, and ambition, is to implement the LCR approach to accelerate climate action. And again, that's beginning to address those underlying governance structures, management practices that are holding things back, and to build the new organizational capabilities and leadership capabilities that are necessary to do this work well. Next slide, please. So over the past year, since ACT and Refocus began collaborating on the Municipal Climate Action Accelerator, we've engaged a broad spectrum of partners who have been involved with our Municipalities Adapting in Response to Complexity partnership. Essentially, we've convened this group to help shape this pilot program. Of course, we have this really strong Ikabiki foundation that Lauren spoke to that sets the stage for us to think about the future of LCR. But the goal was to bring together a broader swath of municipalities, sector NGOs, academics, and innovators to discuss what this next stage of piloting LCR and further developing it could be. And what you see below is some of the municipalities who participated in that dialogue and that process of defining the Municipal Climate Action Accelerator, and some of the NGOs that have also been involved in the conversation, and several of them being NGOs that were committed and are committed to participating in the process of applying LCR as part of that learning and experiential learning process that I mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. Yeah, so in terms of opportunities for you, this is really our call to action. And there's a variety of different ways that you can engage and think about or learn about LCR and potentially implement it within your organization. So of course, you can access LCR materials online You can reference everything in the Google Doc and, of course, go to ACT's website. Those materials continue to be updated and expanded and are free and accessible to all. You are also welcome to consider joining our LCR Phase 1 peer-based introductory workshop series. This is something that is being planned at the moment, so we don't have specifics, but you will have an opportunity to declare an interest in case this is something that you think might be a fit for your organization. The goal will be to bring together 6 to 10 municipalities, perhaps more if there's interest, in going through a peer-based workshop series focused again on shifting mindsets and setting the stage for an implementation phase thereafter. We're also in the process, that is ACT and Refocus, of looking for 2 to 3 municipalities, 2 to 3 additional municipalities, I should say, who are interested in working with us to implement the LCR approach sooner. So if you think the LCR approach may be well suited to your organization, you'd like to explore that, you're welcome to reach out to us. And I should mention, in this sort of phase of development, we already have the town of New Glasgow and the City of London who have engaged with us and will be part of this next group of municipalities that will be working with ACT and Refocus to apply the LCR approach. I'll mention, I think Mike and Jay are here from London on the call, so great to have you, and Rohan from New Glasgow. So really appreciate the partnership and support and your leadership in sort of bringing this innovative approach forward. And thanks for being here today as well. And lastly, you can follow us. There'll be opportunities just to stay in the loop, to understand what's unfolding, to jump in on update meetings and things of that nature. So if that's your interest, you're welcome to join as well. So on that note, I'll pause and give the opportunity to the group to ask any questions related to those opportunities specifically. So if you have a question about what it looks like to apply LCR, what a workshop could look like, following, et cetera, you're welcome to ask that now. And in a moment, we'll give you an opportunity through a survey to let us know of your interest so that we can follow up with you in case that's something you'd like to happen. Does anyone have any questions about those opportunities that were just listed up there? Maybe we could go back to the earlier slide just so that they're still visible. Thank you. Okay, well, if there's nothing off the top, why don't we shift over to our survey and we can come back in case questions come up as people respond or declare where they're at. And we'll give another opportunity just to ask a question or two in case they come up. Felix, do you want to introduce the survey?
Sure. So there's a brief survey here. It's for the webinar in totality, but as Randy mentioned, in the second part of the survey, there is going to be an option for people to identify areas that they may be interested in reaching out to Refocus and ACT, and a place to put their contact information. And of course, we're going to be sharing that with Randy and Lauren after this presentation. So you can either scan the QR code here, or you can click the link that has been placed in the chat. And I'm just going to go have a look and see. And of course, we're not going to close this down until after, probably till the end of day. So if you can't answer it at the moment, you can always sort of put it up in the in one of your web browsers and answer it when you get the moment to. Because I understand we had some folks drop off at the hour, so I know people are moving on. So if you can't get it immediately, don't worry. It will be open sort of till the end of day today.
So we'll give everyone just a couple of minutes now to take care of that survey. And at the same time, if a question comes to mind about any of those opportunities or in general, feel free to pop that into the Q&A or the chat, and we'll continue in a few.
Just the first questions obviously are from the GMF side of things, just asking how people felt about this webinar. Obviously, more folks that can answer this, the better. It helps us, it helps inform us if this was helpful to the folks on the call, and helps inform what people might be interested in moving forward in terms of things that are helpful to them. So I know it's, I know we're doing surveys and some people are all surveyed out, but it does help inform our work. So excellent. I see some folks putting some things in there. So yeah, I'll give that a minute.
Thanks, Felix. That's perfect. Maybe I'll make a final call for any questions about LCR, about Port Moody's experience, or the opportunities for getting involved and applying LCR, learning more about it. And if not, I will start by saying a very big thank you once again to you, Felix, to your team and FCM for hosting this session and inviting us to share a little bit about our experience. I want to say a big thank you again to all of the participants for making the time and space to be here, and for those of you who offered and engaged us with some really fantastic questions that I'm sure were really valuable for everyone else to hear about. So thanks to all of you. And finally, a big thank you as well to Lauren and Laura for joining us today and your great presentations as well. Big thanks. It was a pleasure to have this opportunity. We look forward to hearing from many of you. And yeah, on that note, back over to you, Felix. Thanks.
Yes, thank you so much, Randy, Lauren, and Laura. It was great, and there's of course all kinds of excellent information in there, and to the participants who asked really great questions. I just want to open the floor as we have a few minutes to see if there was any final questions that people had percolating. They can feel free to put them in the chat or in the Q&A box for any of the three guest speakers. And while people are sort of, finishing up the survey and formulating that, I just want to quickly note that we do have upcoming training. So there's a workshop series that's upcoming from GMF on equitable adaptation, and there's the QR codes there for both English and French. That's going to be held on May 29th at 11 a.m. until 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And you can feel free to sign up there. Another thing I posted in the chat earlier that we also guide people to the FCM Connect. That helps people identify opportunities like this in the future for GMF webinars, training, and other news that comes out. And of course, there is the link to the LLCA initiative that I'm a part of. I think I'm just going to go back quickly to the Q&A and just leave it open there.
We do have a question, Felix.
Okay.
It comes from Dina or Dinah. And the question is about the possibility of community association members getting more training and an interest in these types of solutions. I don't know what community association members, is that an FCM membership or something otherwise? The label doesn't stand out to me as something I'm familiar with. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm going to give Dina a second to see if that's maybe you're looking as nonprofit or like community associations. I think sometimes there's community-based organizations of FCA and FCM.
I see.
Okay, interesting.
So the simple answer from our end is, we're very much interested in continuing to design and tailor training experiences to and for municipalities. As we mentioned earlier, we're looking towards having a peer-based introductory workshop series later this summer. There's opportunities like what we're doing with the City of London and Town of New Glasgow to create a more tailored experience for an individual municipality. And we're also in dialogue and discussion with FCM as to how we might engage in various approaches to developing training or securing LLCA funding to offer LCR training and programming more programmatically and as part of a larger play. So all of that is emergent, but if you're specifically motivated and would like to make something happen sooner, that's absolutely something we could be responsive to. I see that you've asked about the QR codes, and I wonder if you are looking to have the link placed into the chat just so that it's easy to click on and so that you could respond. That would be the best way from my perspective to let us know what you're interested in, and we can obviously follow up and engage as it makes sense. Felix, would it be possible to put the link into the chat?
Yep. You're looking for this one here from the SFU, or was there a different one?
The one related to the QR code, just so that can be accessed directly through a link to the survey. Is there a link to the survey that can be put in the chat?
A link to the survey. A link to the survey should be in the chat, but I will send it again just for I see him further explore the slide. Rank the three barriers. Yes, that is something that we are also keen on looking at. Um, Jay. So the fact that Lauren had and Randy had that sort of prepared was actually really helpful to us as well. But yeah, that's part of that collaborative effort. I think he's talking about the Mentimeter, Mentimeter slide.
Jay, you'll be happy to know I've saved the results from that, and I agree it's definitely a snapshot in time, but yeah, we want this climate action to be in it for the long haul as well. We want to make sure that it's continued beyond this political moment.
Okay. I think if that is everything, again, I just want to thank everyone for coming and staying. I know we had lots of participants stay right up to the end, and we really, really appreciate it. We know sometimes it's difficult with an hour and a half webinar to stick it out because usually the time allotment is an hour. So for those who stayed, thank you very much, and hopefully this was informative to you. I know I've got lots of things percolating now. And Randy, Laura, Lauren, it was lovely to work alongside you and give all of this lovely information and share it with folks. But yes, I think we will call it here for today. And obviously, please sign up with the FCM Connect for future webinars. And thank you. Thank you to all our guest speakers, and thanks for everyone for attending. All right,
Thanks,
we're gonna
everybody.
say, we're gonna say thank you and goodbye.